We asked the Taoiseach whether he agrees with the Garda Commissioner when the Garda Commissioner says the far right is not growing. And how does that statement tally with the reality of what we've experienced over the last couple of weeks in particular? We hear of a man in his 70s in hospital now after being assaulted at one of these blockades at Corrafin in Clare. We know of tents of asylum seekers being burned, with some of those involved in the protest alleging that they had an agreement with the guards to go in to clear them. We've had the left, people before profit in particular, being targeted, our meetings being disrupted, our activists being intimidated, us being threatened. We have blockades in different parts of the country. You have a situation where the Gardaí were present, as far as I understand, where you had the boarding of buses to count people going out and then a reference to some sort of right to protest. Is the Garda Commissioner dealing with the real world if he's just ignoring the reality of quite troubling things that are happening in our country?
Thank you, Ciarán. I want to thank the deputies again for further questions. Just in relation to the issue of communications and information and engagement with communities, I want to reassure the House that work is ongoing across government to intensify and improve communications and community engagement. We shouldn't forget that 84,000 people have been provided with accommodation, state-provided accommodation in the past year in more than 100 different centres across the country, and most of the time that has worked well. There has been information, there has been communications, and there has been broad acceptance by the local community. But we do acknowledge that in some places it could have been better, and I think in County Clare it was one of those places where it could have been better in the last few weeks. And we do appreciate that understanding and listening to communities is essential as we accommodate people in communities across the country. My department and the Department of Integration and other relevant departments and stakeholders are developing a more effective method of sharing information with communities. That work is nearing completion. A tender has been issued to assist in this work and is currently being reviewed, and the new model will be implemented as soon as possible. Separate to that, the party leaders met last evening and confirmed that Minister Gorman and the Department of Integration are free to hire additional staff to support him and Minister Gorman in their work in engaging with communities. In relation to the right to work, which is raised by deputies, and I'm conscious that we do have labour shortages across the board now in Ireland, Ukrainian people, because they're beneficiaries of temporary protection, have the right to work immediately, so long as they get a PPS number. About 15,000 are already. For IP applicants, it is different, and we need to be careful in that regard. Unless you've been refused permission to stay, you can apply for a work permit. I think it's after 6 months now. Used to be 9, used to be impossible. We'd have a real reluctance in easing that any further because it could be a major pull factor for thousands of more people to come to the country and claim international protection. Lots of people who claim international protection are fleeing war and are fleeing persecution, but lots aren't. Lots are economic migrants who came here and applied for international protection when they really ought to have applied for a work permit or a work visa and didn't. And we have to be honest about that, and that means making sure that decisions are made quickly and that we don't issue work permits too easily, because that would be a pull factor, and that's something we need to avoid. As I've said before, when it comes to migration, we need to be fair and firm, fair with people who come here to work with work permits and work visas, people who come here as refugees, making sure that they're treated well and get the opportunities that they deserve and are protected, but also firm with people who don't follow our rules-based system. We have rules and we are going to enforce them, and we're going to try and speed up decisions both in favour of applicants and against applicants. When decisions are made against applicants, we want to see more deportation orders, and we want to see people having confidence that those rules will be applied and will be implemented. Just in relation to the office block nearby, not aware of it, but I will let Minister Gorman know and his team that it's a possibility to be looked at. On the Community Recognition Fund, 50 million allocated last week, been really well received around the country. Have asked the relevant ministers to look at the possibility of a second round in a few months' time. Deputy Batchik asked about who's in charge of modular homes. It's the OPW, which is part of the Department of Public Expenditure. Minister O'Donovan specifically is working on that. The first will be available next month, and that's a further example of how there is a cross-government effort to help with the refugee crisis. The OPW, which is neither part of the Department of Housing nor part of the Department of Integration, working to provide accommodation for people coming here from overseas. Just finally, on the issue in relation to the far right, I think it's impossible for me to say whether it's growing or not. I don't think it's growing in terms of political support. I might be wrong about that. So perhaps the Garda Commissioner's reference was in relation to that. Maybe it was in relation to the number of protests or the numbers turning up at those protests, but they're not figures that I have to hand.